All right, folks, I think we're ready for our second presentation of the session. And in the interest of time, I'm letting presenters introduce themselves to you. So, Tammy Tucker.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be here with all of you today. So I am actually a professional engineer. I'm not a GIS professional, but I have collaborated with GISPs my entire career, and I really think this presentation can be beneficial to everyone that's here. I've spent most of my career in floodplain management and flood risk analysis, but in recent years, I've focused on incorporating equity principles and considering equity in the work that I do, and it's something that we all need to be doing. So I'm going to be discussing some data sets and introducing you to that. But first, I have a couple intro slides. Oh, apologies. So first, you hear these terms used. What is the difference between equality and equity? So equality basically implies same treatment, same opportunity, same access. Equity is incorporating fairness into that. So it recognizes historical inequalities that already exist, and I think this image is a great representation of the difference between the two. And then we have social vulnerability. It's the potential for negative impacts from external stresses on communities. And then social justice is taking all of that into account, applying equitable access to the equal rights. And then environmental justice is applying that to environmental policies, regulations, et cetera. So why am I talking about this? So obviously, social vulnerability, inequality, that's existed since the beginning of time, but the federal government has really started to place a priority on this. So I just have a couple quotes here, but they're really trying to incorporate this into the foundation of what the federal government does. And here's just a long list of executive orders, all issued in 2021 that focus on equity or environmental justice. And then I just want to highlight one of those, 14008, tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad. One piece of this executive order established the Justice 40 initiative. This is a whole of government effort to deliver at least 40% of benefits from climate and clean energy into disadvantaged communities. So this initiative directed any federal agencies that make any such investment to maximize benefits to disadvantaged communities, as well as report on their progress towards that goal annually. So they've started doing that. It also directed the Council on Environmental Quality to develop a screening tool specifically to identify disadvantaged communities and to develop an EJ scorecard for the federal government to report on its progress. So I'm going to introduce some data sets to you. Just a caveat, I'm not an expert on all of these. I have a lot more experience with some than others. I'm highlighting tools that I think are most widely used and could be really beneficial to everyone here. So there's going to be more information on the slides than I can discuss today, but I have it there if you want to go back and look at any ones in particular, and there's links to every data set that I cover today. So first, we'll start with the CDC Social Vulnerability Index, or SVI. This is one of two strictly social vulnerability data sets I'll go over today. It's widely used. Many of you have probably heard of this. A lot of federal agencies use this data set. This data set is downloadable. You can download it as a shapefile, and you can download it two ways: a national data set that provides national percentile rankings, or a state-level data set that gives you statewide percentile rankings. And so this looks at 16 different socioeconomic variables, which are grouped into 4 themes, and then it also provides overall vulnerability score. They did have an update recently in 2020 with new census data, and they've introduced some adjunct variables, which do not play into that overall vulnerability score, but there's information like access to broadband, which is starting to get a lot of focus. So I just wanted to give you a couple ways that you could look at this data. So it is an online tool, but like I said, you can download it. And so what I'm showing the difference between the national download and the state download. So they look similar, but when you look closely, there are differences between those rankings. And then again, you can look at any one of the 4 themes. That top image is looking at one of the themes. And then just a couple of those 16 variables, a couple of those we're looking at here. So lots of ways to look at this data. You can look at combined individual indicators. The other strictly social vulnerability data set that I'm going to discuss is the University of South Carolina Social Vulnerability Index. And we call this SOVI. So this looks at 29 variables. This data set is not downloadable from the USC site, and it's not an online tool. You can download PDFs of the national percentile ranking scores or statewide maps that shows the quintile rankings of the overall vulnerability on a county basis. There is another location you can access this data as a download, and I'm going to cover that in the next tool because that's where it's available. And they are currently working on an update for this data set to incorporate 2020 census data. So the next data set is FEMA's National Risk Index. This is designed to illustrate risk to 18 different natural hazards. You can see the risk equation up here. It incorporates 3 different variables. So expected annual loss, which is the average expected financial losses from a given natural hazard. And then it has a social vulnerability and community resilience component. And both of those are data sets directly from University of South Carolina. Sorry, I'm talking fast. I'm going to slow down. So the social vulnerability component is that SOVI data set. So this is where you can go to access that and look specifically at that if you want it. One caveat, FEMA did announce last year that they're going to swap that out for SVI. I don't know when that's going to happen, but that's coming. And the resilience data set is also from USC, their BRIC data set, and so you can also look at that. So these are the 18 natural hazards that it looks at. And so this data set provides 17 variables of information for every single natural hazard. So again, this is an online tool, but you can also download it and look at any of this information how you want. And so again, just a few examples of how you can look at this data. We have the overall risk rating, so that's combined of all 18 natural hazards. You can look at an individual natural hazard, which is the riverine flooding risk over here that I'm showing. And then this image is the SOVI data on the bottom right. So this is just the social vulnerability component. And again, you can look at any one of those pieces, 17 pieces of information for any hazard as well. And then we move into EPA's EJ screen. So this has also been around for a while, and it's widely used in the environmental realm. So a lot of agencies and organizations use this tool already. This is an online tool only. You can't download it, but they do provide documentation with links to every data set that's in here. So if you wanted to, you could go collect it all. You can produce reports at census block, tract, county level. And then they have been using this for a while. One important thing to call out is that it does not consider cumulative impacts. So this is going to come up a couple times in the presentation. Basically, you can only look at one environmental indicator at a time. You can't look at the combined impacts of multiple ones. So I've listed some of the data here that is included. So you can see 12 environmental indicators, and then some of these other indicators that are included. And so what this tool produces is 12 environmental justice indices. And so what that is any single environmental indicator combined with the demographic index, which is an average of 2 of the socioeconomic indicators. And more recently, they've added 12 supplemental indices. Similar thing, one of the environmental indicators, but with the supplemental demographic index. And so that's an average of 4 socioeconomic indicators and 1 health disparity indicator. Now I'm going to move on to the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, which we call the CGIST for short. This is the tool that was developed specifically for the Justice 40 initiative. So this tool has to be used by all federal agencies that make investments in climate and clean energy to report on their progress towards the Justice 40 goals. They may use other tools alongside this, but this has to be used. And just to call out the scale of the Justice 40 initiative, there's over, I believe, 450 federal programs that are affected by this. You don't work with a federal client, you work with local or municipalities, local government, state government. They may be applying for grants to one of these federal programs. So it's really important to be aware of this. This data set is downloadable, so you can work with it. It's also an online tool. It considers 8 environmental or climate burdens, which you can see in the middle box. And then I meant to delete that bottom one, apologies, the socioeconomic burden. So scratch this one. The first 7 environmental climate indicators also consider the low-income socioeconomic indicator. The training and workforce development factor is combined with the high school education indicator. And so I want to show you, this is what the online tool looks like. And it's on a census tract level. So that dark blue boundary is the selected census tract. Gray shading indicates a disadvantaged community or census tract. So you can see, well, you might not be able to see, but at the top it tells you if it's disadvantaged or not. It'll say yes or no. There's also a partial disadvantage category that can be there as well. It has the 8 environmental climate factors. You drop down any one of them, you can see all of the indicators considered for that factor, as well as the socioeconomic indicator. So how is a tract classified as disadvantaged? There's 3 ways. So it can meet the 90th percentile threshold for any single indicator under one of those categories and meets the established threshold for the sociodemographic indicator. That would cause it to be disadvantaged. If it doesn't meet that, and the tract is completely covered by federally recognized tribal land, it would also be disadvantaged. And then if it doesn't meet those first 2, it can also be classified as disadvantaged if it's completely surrounded by other disadvantaged tracts. And then I said you could have partial disadvantage. So the way that is, the only instance that occurs is if it doesn't meet those 3 bullets, but there is some federally recognized tribal land. Only those areas on that land would be classified as disadvantaged. So what you would see is like a checkering of shading in the tract. And again, download the data. You can look at a bunch of different ways. The top one is just disadvantaged or not. This middle one is looking at the number of those factors, those 8 climate factors that cause this to be classified as disadvantaged. And then just one of the indicators that are looked at in one of those categories. So again, lots of ways you can use this data. And then the last tool that I wanted to mention is the USDOT developed a tool in response to the Justice 40 initiative. It's in the experimental stage. They issued an RFI, and it's in a comment period. So if you work with the DOT, I would suggest going there, checking it out, and providing comment. I provided a link there for you to do that. The difference with this is that they're looking to identify disadvantaged communities from a transportation perspective. So they will have to use the CGIST, but they are working on this tool as well. This one does look at cumulative impacts. So it considers 5 components. Transportation insecurity is the more unique one that other data sets haven't looked at as much. And then these other ones. So it can look at the combination of those impacts. And I just wanted to briefly show you some of the indicators under the transportation insecurity component because it's more unique. And this is what the dashboard looks like. Currently, it's not downloadable. It's just an online tool. I'm not sure if that's the intention for when it does go live, but currently you can't download the data. You have to work on the dashboard. And then I just briefly want to mention a few items I'm not going to go into detail on, but the first 3 data sets here are resiliency data sets. So the first one is the one that you can get from the National Risk Index. It's from the University of South Carolina. The FEMA one you can get from their WRAPT tool. And then the US Census Bureau's data set is an online tool and downloadable. And then last, we already discussed EPA's EJ screen. Recently, they developed the Environmental Justice Index, and this one actually looks at cumulative impacts. So that's the difference, and that's more recent, and I haven't really used that tool yet. Now I'm going to move on to some of the state data sets and tools, just a few. So I just compiled a list of environmental justice tools that I know are out there. This isn't necessarily all-inclusive, but the ones I'm aware of. And so the main point of that is to show you that there's a lot of states considering this. They're at various stages. Some have been in use for years, some are just being developed, some are in comment period. They map at various levels. They're used for various purposes depending on who's developing the tool. Some you can download, some are just online tools. And a lot of tools build off of the methods of EJ Screen, which does not look at cumulative impacts, or Cal EnviroScreen. So Cal EnviroScreen, EJ Screen was the first national EJ tool developed, to my knowledge. Cal EnviroScreen was the first EJ tool developed, to my knowledge. So EPA was kind of keeping an eye on this tool as they were working on theirs. But this one does look at cumulative impacts. It is downloadable as a geodatabase, shapefile, etc. So that was mainly what I wanted to point out on that one. And then last, I just wanted to mention a tool in our own state. The DEQ has a community mapping system in EJ tool. This is an online tool only. It presents program information. So in this screenshot, there's a bunch of dots. You can see different colors, but those are basically permitting and incident tracking points. And you can click on, this is census block level. You can click on any block and this box will pop up. You'll get some demographic information, and then there's a link to the EJ tool. And so this is what pops up. This is the EJ tool dashboard. Again, some demographic information on the highlighted census block. And then you have all this data. You have a health dashboard. There's tabs with different data, and then also demographic data. And so there's multiple variables there. You can scroll through. It shows at the level you're zoomed into in this image here, and it also shows statewide numbers so that you can compare. You can zoom in and out in that image there, and these numbers will change as you go. And very last thing I want to mention, I just heard in an earlier session that the NC DOT has an EJ dashboard that, I don't want to mess up the name, I think Dr. Paula from NC State, he presented on and they developed that. He wasn't sure how it was being used, but it's in a comment period. So I don't know if they plan to use those in combination. I don't know anything about that tool except what I learned today. So if you work with the NC DOT, I suggest going and checking that out as well and commenting on that one. And so that's what I had for you today. I know it's a lot of information. If you have questions, happy to take them, or feel free to email me or anything later. No questions? Yes. Yeah, it was beta version until late last year. They just put version 1.0 late last year. But yeah, it's census tract level. Yes.
So for the EPA, like EJ Screen, when they decided to not do cumulative, is that intentional to not discourage people from using it?
I don't think that was their intention. They have caveats you'll see in their documentation that this is intended to be a screening tool only, but I think enough people, there's the cumulative impacts always comes up, that discussion. And so I think that's why they developed EJI more recently. So the Environmental Justice Index tool, I believe, was in the last year or two that it came out. So they're providing both now. Yes?
Of the state EJ tools that you reviewed or that you know of, is there a common theme or a common entity within the state government that is producing these? And then if so, is there that entity within North Carolina that potentially could or should be constructing such a?
So I definitely do not see like one consistent entity that's putting these together at states. It's different agencies. So for example, here, the DEQ, some are DOT, some are like DEQs, state level. So it does vary on who's creating these. I'll say the benefit is that at that smaller scale, they can incorporate some of that more granular data that's unique to their state and their region. Whereas the national tools, you're using national data sets, so you can't get that granular. All right, thank you.